Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Nun Zayin. We're on the third line of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, and we are talking about from based on our Mishnah a variety of categories of products that are not subject to ona, not subject to the law of the fact that if you charge 1/6 more, then the transaction is valid and the person gets their the difference. The whoever was defrauded gets the difference, or whoever was cheated gets the difference between the actual value and what was actually paid. So if they paid too much, the person who paid the extra would get the money back, and if they paid too little, the person who paid too little would have to pay an additional amount in order to make everybody whole. And that's the law of Onab. There's debate as to sort of what we when we say that there's no, what exactly does that mean? And that's exactly what the next question that Gemara asks is all about. So Amarava, Amarav Chasa. This is again we're third line, middle of the line, right after the word teku on Zion Amud Aleph, third line. So Amarava, Amarav Chasa, by Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami had the following question: Ona ein lahem. So, all right, you've told me now, and the Mishnah told us that in these various categories, and just to, if we look back at the Mishnah, let's do that very quickly, right? So, our Mishnah had a variety of categories, specifically avadim, shtaros, karkaos, and hektashos. So, slaves, um, uh, uh, documents that indicate an amount of money is owed, karkos, land, and hektashos, property that belongs to the Beis Hamikdash. All of them don't have ona, and meaning that if you were to purchase those items and either pay too much or too little, then it would not be subject to the fraud. But the question is when we say that, that's just the law of of paying exactly 1/6 too much or 1/6 too little. So the Gemara is ona ein lahem, right? So Rabbi Yami recognizes that in fact our Mishnah said that there is no law of ona, but bittul mekach yesh lahem o ein lahem. When we say that, does that? What about the law for if it was a greater difference than 1/6? Because as a reminder, if you charge more than a sixth more than you're supposed to, or pay less than a sixth more than you're supposed to. So then the complete transaction is voided. And so the question is if there's a sufficiently large inconsistency, do we just say that the transaction is void? So Amar of Nachman, Hadar Amar of Chasa, at some point, Rav Chasa went back and said, Pashit Rabbi Yami, Ona Ein Lahem, Bittul Mekach Yesh Lahem. In the end, Rabbi Ami concluded that, in fact, although there's no ona, there is a law of bittul mekach. Now, Tosfos here points out that the Gemara in on Daf Kuf Chet Amud Aleph. Let's take a look at the top Tosfos. Mashma de Rav Nachman lo poliga Rav Chasa. This statement of Rav Nachman suggests that he agrees with Rav Chasa. So as a result, Avraham Chasa Rabo, his teacher. So Vikasha Rabbeinu Tam, but that seems problematic to Rabbeinu Tam, one of the Baal Tosos. The Perek HaMakabel that we'll see in Perek HaMakabel in coming up on Daf Kochet Amud Aleph, so in a couple of weeks. Amrinan Zavan Beresh, that if it was something was sold for 200, the Shava Kuf and was worth 100, Savormina. So the thought is that maybe it would be an issue. And Amar of Nachman, Eino na karkos. And he said in that context, there's no ona for karka, implying that the transaction was valid. Afilu betza pitul mekach ein lahem. And therefore, there wouldn't be even any kind of undoing of the transaction. So Vatiris Rabbeinu Tam. So Rabbeinu Tam, based on this potential inconsistency, reaches a very major conclusion, and that is the Ein Ona Ad Palga. That when it comes to real estate, there's no Ona unless you pay less than half or more than double. Aval mipalga ve'elech mikri b'tel meka. But when it comes to paying, less than a half or more than double, well, then there would be a negative transaction because there would be bittul mekach. Because again, the Gemara here seems to make clear that Rav Nachman believes, just as Rav Chassid does, that Rabbi Ami would say that although there's no onah, it is possible to have a disadvantaged transaction to the extent that it would be nullified. Okay, so now that we have that, Rabbi Yonah Amar Ahak Deshos. When Rabbi Yonah,
what's the nafkamina? Because if it's canceled because of Onan, it's canceled because the sale is not valid. So it's canceled in both cases.
Very big nafkamina. Onah, whatever the threshold is for onah, the transaction is valid and you have to pay the difference. Whereas when we say bittul mekach, it means that the transaction is invalid, is voided. So that's the very big difference between onah and bittul mekach. So So thank you for allowing me to just clarify that. When we say onah, that if they were to say yesh lahem onah, it doesn't just the main piece, and indeed Rashi believes that when we say ein lahem onah, that actually the only thing that we don't have is that if it's exactly a 6, then you would have no it would still be a valid transaction and no money would have to transfer. But according to Rashi, not here but elsewhere, you would have to if it was more than a 6, he would say that bittul mekach, that there's no valid transaction even for these 4 items.
But there's no valid transaction here if it's greater than so. In that case,
no. So here again, Tosfos is saying that that if it's greater than a 6 difference, there would be a valid transaction with respect to real estate, and that when we say bittul mekach, it has to be that you paid more than double or less than half. Okay, so that's the only situation of bittul mekach, because again, the inconsistent between this Gemara, which seems to suggest that there's bittul mekach, and the Gemara on Daf Kochet, which seems to suggest that even if you were to pay half or pay double, you would not have, you would still have a valid transaction. And we said, and because Rav Nachman says there, Eino Nala Karkos, and even though it was you paid half or you paid double, and so as a result, the implication that Rabbeinu Tam takes away is that that when it comes to karka, when it comes to real estate, if you pay more than less than double or more than half, it is a valid transaction and no additional money needs to change hand. There's no fraud that's associated with it. There's no cheating that's involved in that transaction. It's only the bigger difference. So there are 3 different opinions in connection with where we end up on this. The one opinion is Rashi, which says that basically if it's the only law that doesn't apply to these 4 categories of products is if the price is exactly 1/6 more or 1/6 less. Then there's no valid transaction and you pay back the difference. That's the only law that doesn't apply. But if you charge more than a 6 more or less than a 6, or you pay less than a 6 less, then you would end up getting, the transaction would be void even for all 4 of these. Tosfos is the middle case. He says that when it comes to real estate, at least the ratio is not 1/6, but a half, meaning you have to pay double or you have to pay half. And only then, if you pay more than that or pay less than that, you're going to have an invalid transaction. And then there are some who say, when it comes to real estate, and we say that ain't onah, that there's no onah when it comes to real estate, it means that the halacha of onah does not apply, and it does not apply in a manner that says that no matter how much you pay extra, we're going to say it's a valid transaction. So those are the 3 viewpoints on the Gemara that the Rishonim take with respect to this. Okay.
So the last opinion is that there's no onah whatsoever.
Correct. That in fact, that even if you were to charge triple, quadruple for real estate, if you come to my home and my home is worth, I don't know, whatever it's worth, and I say, you know what, I'm only going to sell it to you for triple, and you decide to pay it, and then you sue me and say, but the house was only worth this amount. Tough luck. It's a real estate transaction. Doesn't make a difference. I could charge you whatever I want, and it'll be a valid transaction. And on the other hand, if you wanted to pay, a quarter of what it's worth, and you convinced me to do that, I would also have no ability to say, oh, 1 second, it's ona, it should be, or it should be a bittul mekach. I would not have any ability to do that according to that third view.
But ona applies only in a sixth. For a sixth, if it's greater in the case, if we say there's ona, if it's greater than a sixth, then the transaction is bittul, right?
The key point, no, the ona is the law that says that at some threshold, the transaction is valid, and you have to pay the difference. And somebody needs to pay the difference to make the person who lost, who was cheated, whole. That's the law of ona. And when we say that it doesn't apply, the question that the Gemara is saying is, do we therefore say that it's that there's a different potential threshold at which we would say that the transaction is totally invalid? Rashi says, yes, the threshold is still 1/6. What you're saying is basically just like Rashi, that Rashi would say, fine, you're going to say no ona for these items. So at the difference of 1/6, we're going to say it's a valid transaction. But once you get to 1/6 plus 1 pruta, or 1/6 minus 1 pruta in terms of the difference, so then as a result, it's going to be an invalid transaction. It's totally void, according to Rashi. But according to Tosfos, when it comes to real estate, the threshold is not going to be a 6. The threshold is a half. So the point is that you have to recognize that there are two different aspects to the law here. One is the halakha of ona, which is that if you have it at exactly the right amount, so then the transaction is valid and you pay the difference. And then there's a bittul mekach, which is something that if there's a different potentially threshold, again, Tosfos has a different threshold, but then the transaction would be totally voided. Okay, so now what we're going to hear is that there's going to be this debate among opinions in Rabbi Yochanan, right? That will say different views of what this debate was about. So Rabbi Yonah Amar Ahekteshos. Rabbi Yonah said that when it came to this statement, it was about hektish. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Karkos. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that no, it was about land. The Tarvayu Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan Amru. And both of them said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that in fact that was what Rabbi Ami was talking about. Ona, and again, Ona ein lahem bittul mekach. Ona ein lahem bittul mekach yesh lahem. That when it came to Ona, there's no Ona. But when it comes to bittul mekach, there is bittul mekach. So again, according to one of them, it would be according to Rabbi Yirmiyah. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, it would be only with respect to land, and when it came to Rabbi Yonah, it was with respect to also with respect to hektish. And Manda Amar Ahektish shows the view of Rabbi Yirmiyah of Rabbi Yonah, who says that it also applies to hektish. Kosher our karkos, it would certainly apply to karka. Manda Amar karkos, whereas when it came to Rabbi Yirmiyah, who said that Rabbi Yochanan's statement was only about land, when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, it would be not. And Kiddush Shmuel, and it makes sense that it would be not, because that viewpoint would hold like Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel hektish shaviv mana, that if you have something that's worth $100 of hektish, I'll shove a pruta, but you deconsecrate it on something that's only worth a pruta, it's considered deconsecrated. And so as a result, you have these two viewpoints with respect to what the extent is that Rabbi Ami's statement of Ein Lahem Ona, but Bittul Mekach Yesh Lahem. So Tanan Hasa, but one second, we have a Mishnah that seems to suggest that Rabbi Yonah's version of Rabbi Yochanan is inconsistent. Imahaya Kodesh Balmum, because when it came to Tamura, This is from the Mishnah in Tamura, Daf Kav Bava Mebet. If you have some animal that was consecrated and has a blemish, imhaya kodesh balmum yotza, then if you change it for another animal, because that animal had a blemish, so when it was consecrated only from a financial standpoint. So as a result, when you substitute another animal for it, it goes back to being unconsecrated. Unlike the general law of Tamura, right? If you have an animal that you set aside as a korban, and you say, you know what, I don't want to bring this animal, I'll bring a different animal, then in the end, you end up, because again, the law of Tamura is that both animals end up being set aside for a sacrifice. But that is not true when it comes to something that is set aside for a financial purpose. So v'tzarach la'asos lo damim, but you have to make up the value. Well, in second, that Mishnah is completely inconsistent with Rabbi Yochanan's statement of saying that you could that Rabbi Yochanan's statement, according to Rabbi Yonah, that there is no ona with respect to hektish, because that this is saying specifically you have to make up the difference. So therefore, we're going to offer an alternative viewpoint for that. So Amr and Rabbi Yochanan said, Yatza l'chulin dvar Torah, that actually it goes back to being chulin according to the Torah. V'tzarach la'asos lo damim midivreihem, but the rabbi said that you have to make it up. Reish Lakish Amar af tzarach la'asos lo damim min Torah. Actually, you have to even make it up from the Torah. So b'mayaskinan. So what case are we talking about? Because again, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shlakish have this debate with respect to this Mishnah that we just learned from Tamura. So what are they talking about? And we'll see that ends up being inconsistent with Rabbi Yonah. So b'mayaskinan ilema b'kifdei ona. If you want to tell me that the amount of the difference between the two animals was 1/6, was the amount that results in ona, so that the transaction is valid, but you make up the difference. Could it possibly be that Reish Lakish would say that you have to make up for the value according to the Torah? We have in our Mishnah, it's explicit that there's no ona, meaning that if you redeem an animal from hektish for 1/6 less than what you're supposed to, you're fine and dandy because there's no ona. So ella bittul mekach. So it must be that we're dealing with an amount that is greater than what would cause a transaction to become invalid, meaning greater than in an ordinary case is greater than a difference of 1/6. So Behar Lema Rabbi Yochanan Tzarech La'asos Lo Damim Midivreihem, and you were going to say in that case that Rabbi Yochanan says you have to make up the difference. Sek Baha'amar Rabbi Yonah Ahakdeshos Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Akarkos. 1 second. If you're going to tell me that in fact you have to make up the difference according to the rabbis, but Rabbi Yonah says that when it came to Rabbi Yochanan's statement, he made it about the property of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore certainly about land. And Rabbi Yirmiyah said it was about land. The Tarvayu Mishmei to Rabbi Yochanan Amri. Both of them said their statement in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Ona ein lahem, bittul mekach yesh lahem. So how can you say, according to Rabbi Yonah, who's saying that it also applies, that bittul mekach would also apply to hektish, how could Rabbi Yochanan say that all you have to do is pay rabbinically if it should be a bittul mekach? And so that seems to create an internal contradiction within Rabbi Yochanan, because according to Rabbi Yonah, you have one statement where Rabbi Yochanan ends up saying that that there is bittul mekach by hektish, and then you have this statement with respect to the Mishnah in Tamura, where Rabbi Yochanan himself says that there's no bittul mekach, and all you have to do is pay rabbinically. So la'olam b'bittul mekach. The Apok the Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish. So answer number one is really we're talking about where the difference is more than 1/6, and we're going to flip the viewpoints of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So switch them around. Uda Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan, and switch Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan. And so now, according to Rabbi Yonah, when you switch those opinions around, now everything makes sense, because he specifically says, because according to Rabbi Yonah, Rabbi Yochanan says that Ona ein lehem bittul mekach yesh lehen, even with respect to hektish, and the viewpoint of Reish Lakish was that it doesn't even work according to the Torah. So those two viewpoints are consistent. So now by switching Rabbi Yochanan to Reish Lakish's viewpoint. So all right, so so that's answer number one. So b'mai kamifliki. So what exactly are Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan arguing about with respect to that Mishnah in Tamura? So three possibilities about what they're arguing about. And yes, three possibilities. Again, Reish Lakish, according to the way we have it, says that when you're more than a sixth difference, it's a completely invalid making of an item unsanctified. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, as we had it originally, it works. You just have to make up the difference according to the rabbis. So one answer of what they argue about is b'dishmuel. The Amar Shmuel, hekta shavimana shechulu al shavapruta mechulo. Mar islay d'shmuel, umar leislay d'shmuel. So again, the original view of Rabbi Yochanan would hold like Shmuel and say that in fact because you can deconsecrate something even on a pruta, so then it's going to be deconsecrated. The only difference is that the rabbis make you pay up the difference. But Rabbi Reish Lakish would say, no, I don't hold of Shmuel. That would be not. I would not hold of Shmuel's ruling at all. And therefore, if you do too little for your deconsecration, so it doesn't even work at all. Or we could say, actually, really, everybody agrees that technically, from a biblical standpoint, we allow deconsecration of something worth a lot on something worth very little. But here, what they're disagreeing about is the following: Mar savar shechilo ein lechatchila lo. That when it comes to yes, if one actually did deconsecrate it, it becomes deconsecrated. But lechatchila, you shouldn't do it in the first place. Umar savar afilu lechatchila, and the other person says no, you can do it even lechatchila. So the point is that when Reish Lakish says it doesn't work, he means that it doesn't work lechatchila. But if you were to actually do it, it would be valid. And then the third possible answer of what Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing about is Ibayis, or you can say La'olam b'kadei ona lo tifach. That really, when it comes to the amount of ona, you don't even need to switch the rulings around. Meaning, according to we were going to say that you don't need to switch Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in order to make Rabbi Yonah happy. But what they're arguing about is a statement that Rav Chisda made. The Amar, my ein lahem ona. When we say that there's no law of ona with respect to the property of the Beis Hamikdash, einam b'toras ona. What it means is that there's no law of ona. That actually, when we say that there's no law of ona, what it means is that actually even a 1 penny difference is going to require us to make a hektish whole. And so as a result, that's what we're saying. And so according to now again, according to Rabbi Yonah, everything makes sense. Again, Rabbi Yonah was the one who said that the statement ain hektish, ain ona the hektish, but yesh bittul mekach. What he's really saying then, is that ein ona behektish, that even if you had a 1 penny difference, it would be a bittul mekach. And so that's what he was saying. And so as a result, that would be completely consistent with Rabbi Yochanan's rule that with respect to the Mishnah in Tamura. because again, he says that that again, biblically it works, but you have to make up the difference. So Metzia, I'm sorry, and he would say that he doesn't believe in that. So Metzia, so ribis va'ona lahedges. 1 second though, how can Reb Chisda say that when we say that there's no ona, it really means that there's an ona of that there's bittul mekach of even a penny? We have a brisa that says that there's, when it comes to ribis and ona, you have a rule with respect to regular people that they will have to, that they're subject to the rules of ribis and ona. But ve'ein ribis ve'ona lahektish. But we don't have either ribis or ona with respect to hektish. So doesn't that mean that there's no, that you can, that the transaction is valid when you don't have, if you were to charge a 6 more? So mi alima mimaslisa. Well, 1 second, that price is no stronger than our Mishnah. Do kimna b'toras ona. Again, the Mishnah, we end up saying that when we say that there's no ona, it means that there's no law of ona. So hakinami ribis v'din ona lehedjos, that there is interest and the laws of price for fraud with respect to a regular person. But there would not be either any prohibition of ribis or the prohibition of price fraud with respect to the property of the Beis Hamikdash. So ihaki. Well, 1 second. What about the end of that that end of that brisa? Because it says zech homer behedges that this is the stringency of hedyot of a regular person over hektish. What is that referring to? Because now we're saying that actually when it comes to ona, hektish is much stricter. So a ribis, that's going on the ribis comment. Well, listening nami zechomer behektish mibehedyot aona. Well, why not say, have the brisa also tell us that when it comes to ona, that's going to be something, an area where the base where hektish is even stricter than the law of a regular person? Well, haki hashto. Well, 1 second, what kind of comparison is that? Bislama zech omer behedges min behektish fisulo. It makes sense to say that there are certain stringencies with respect to a private, regular person over hektish of the Beis Hamikdash, because there aren't other stringencies. But ela hektish, if you were going to tell me that the fact that price fraud would apply to even a small difference with respect to hektish, zech omer v'sulo, are you going to tell me that that's the only one and there aren't others? There's a lot of laws with respect to hektish that are more strict than with respect to a regular person. So now that we highlighted all that, so now we're going to note the fact that when it comes to ribis, how ribis can apply to the Beit Hamikdash. So ribis,
which is more chomer than I thought we were saying that behedjes zeh chomer behedje behektish, and now we say that hektish is more chomer than hedje.
Oh, yes, 100%. Hektish on the vast majority of legal issues, hektish, property that belongs to the Beis Hamikdash, is much stricter. For example, you have the law of Me'ila. You can't just go ahead and use property that belongs to hektish.
Right.
But with respect to one law, namely the halacha of ribis, that the Beis Hamikdash has the ability to charge interest, whereas a regular person does not. That's an area where the Beis Hamikdash is less strict than a regular person. A regular person has a restriction that they cannot charge interest, and the Beis Hamikdash does not have that restriction. And so that's one area where the regular person, the hedyot, is more strict. And so that's what the Mishnah was highlighting, that in that one area, a private individual would be more strict than the Beis Hamikdash. So now we're going to ask the question, what is that case of interest? When is it that the Beis Hamikdash is allowed to charge interest? Because you'll see, if we think about the typical case, if I donate something to the Beis Hamikdash to raise funds for the Beis Hamikdash, and then the treasurer lends it out, we'll see that there's a problem. Ribis de hektish, dummy. What's the case of ribis of the Beis Hamikdash? Because ilim de osei gizbar meya b'meya ve'esrim. If you're going to tell me that the treasurer of the Beis Hamikdash goes and lends out 100, and asks to be paid back 120. V'halomal hagizbar. Once the gizbar, the treasurer has done that, he's performing me'ila. He's not allowed to enable some private person to use it on his own. That money belongs to the Beis Hamikdash and is subject to me'ila. The Kevan Shemal, and now once the Gizbar and once the treasurer performs me'ila, the coins become deconsecrated. And now they belong to the treasurer himself because he's taken them on. Now he's going to owe the Beis Hamikdash the amount that he took plus a 1/5 penalty, but he's not allowed to just go and now charge interest, because now it's him charging the interest. So
no, he's working on behalf of the Beit HaMikdash.
No, but remember, once he took the money out of the Beis Hamikdash with the intention to use it, that's performing Me'ila. That's an act of Me'ila. And the act of Me'ila itself undermines and causes the money that was hektish to now become chulin, to now become deconsecrated, to be not holy. And so as a result,
well, that depends on intent. Right. If he intends to use it on his own behalf, but if he's acting on behalf of the Beit HaMikdash, then why shouldn't it not be acceptable?
Because he doesn't have the authority in that situation to enable somebody to use the money. Again, what happens is I gave $100 to the Beis Hamikdash, and then you, as the treasurer, go and lend it out to Stan. The problem is that as soon as you take the money to lend to Stan, even though you're intending to lend it on behalf of the Beis Hamikdash, that's Me'ila. It's not the intended purpose. The intended purpose is to raise money, is to fund all the expenses associated with the operation of the Beis Hamikdash. And so because you've used it for a different purpose, and of course you have to, in order to perform Me'ila, you have to do it by accident. You have to don't have to do it. You can't do it on purpose. And actually Tosfos addresses the fact that we can't be talking about a purposeful act either, because that would also be a problem. But in any event, the point is that you, when you then take it and try to lend it to Stan, you're performing Me'ila. Now, all of a sudden, that becomes deconsecrated. And whose coins do we treat it as? We treat it as your coins. So now when you lend to Stan the $100 and ask to be paid back 120, you're a private individual charging interest. Okay, so it's not, that's the problem. That's exactly right. You can't do that. You don't have the right, even though your intention is to lend on behalf of the Beis Hamikdash. So we have to adjust the facts. So
where does this come from? If a person is working for a company and he's the treasurer, whatever, the agent of the company, let's say, or the Beit HaMikdash, the owner, the manager of the Beit HaMikdash say, you can lend this money to make more money for the Beit HaMikdash.
Right, but the answer to your question is that you only have in a corporation the authority that's granted to you, and the authority that's granted to the treasurers of the Beis Hamikdash does not allow them to just lend out money. That is just not one of the authorities, and so as a result, if they were to do so, they would be committing Me'ila. So that,
is that a Devar Torah? I mean, where's that come from?
Yes, because the only thing you're allowed to do is what was assigned to the thing in the first place. And this money, all the money that is given to the Beis Hamikdash, is in order to repair it, in order to buy korbanot, to pay for the repairs.
Okay, but what's the makor?
What do you mean? What's the makor?
Well, I mean, where's the source of this?
Well, the source is that when you lend out the money, it is not for the Beis Hamikdash. You might be making money for the Beis Hamikdash, but that's never was a valid source. Now, we haven't gone through all the halachot of Me'ila, but the clear implication of this Gemara is that if you were to use Me'ila, if you were use Beis Hamikdash property for something that is not a specifically.
Well, that I understand. I'm just saying, where does this come from? That it would seem logical that if he's raising money for the Beit, and that additional money could be used for the Beit HaMikdash, the whole purpose is to raise money for the Beit HaMikdash.
No,
I understand that once you get past the next step, it's Me'ila. But how did you come to that? That's
All
my
right, but
point.
I don't have the specific answer. I mean, I don't know the pasuk that says that you can't that is specifically that shows that you can that only things that are constructive for the Beis Hamikdash. But that's the way I understand it. When you make a donation to the Beis Hamikdash, it must be used for the Beis Hamikdash. I'll see if I have a better answer, God willing, tomorrow. Let me look into that. Okay. But the bottom line is so let's take for the moment the assumption that you cannot use it for another purpose. So and if you do so, then that's going to be a problem. So Amar of Hoshia. So Hakam Mayaskin, here's what we're talking about. Kagon Shekibil Alav Lisapek Lislatos Me'arba. So the point is that we're not talking about the classic case of charging interest, but it's a effectively a rabbinic case of charging interest. So we have seen already, and we're going to see in the next parak in greater detail, that I cannot make a futures transaction where I say to you for something that is not available on the market at the moment. That you know what, I'm going to pay you $100 for 100 pounds of apples, and you're going to give me those 100 pounds of apples in a year from now. That is not, or let's say this fall when the apple crop comes in. That is not a valid transaction because there's a chance that the price of that that effectively by my paying you today the $100, if the price of apples ends up being higher than $1 per bushel, when you pay me the 100 bushels, it's going to end up being 100 pounds, excuse me. When you pay me the 100 pounds, you're paying back an amount that is worth more than $100. And so that's like paying interest. So that's what we're talking
So
about.
you're saying you can never order anything? Let's say I order grapefruits and the grapefruits don't arrive for 3 weeks. I pay the company for the grapefruits in Florida. They arrive in 3 weeks. By that time, there's a difference in 20 cents in grapefruits. So you can never order
100%.
anything? You can never order anything on Amazon?
We that is going to be the topic of the next parak, and I don't want to go through the entire details of the next parak, but it depends on it depends on the specific situation. But yes, that technically could be an issue of charging interest, and if you were buying it from somebody who is Jewish, that could potentially be a problem. The answer in the general is that it's not an issue because the point is that you're paying the current market price, and usually you're also paying for transportation, etc. And so you end up paying a service so that you effectively own the product as if you owned it now. And there's an insurance project, essentially a separate insurance product that you're purchasing with respect to your anything that happens along the way. But as a result, if you own it now, that's not a problem. If you right, the fact that it gets delivered in 3 weeks, but you own it now, you could sell it now, and that would be fine. And so as a result, he's already paid you the value. Any current transaction would not be an issue. Now, if he doesn't actually, and the other issues is that if he already has the product, that also will be a permitted transaction. So again, there are lots of caveats to the laws of Ona. But if you don't have the product and the seller doesn't have the product and the product is not available in the market, then yes, if I were to buy it from you from now and you deliver it in 3 weeks and it's gone up in price, then I have a problem with potentially having charged you interest. So Amr of Oshia, so the Hakam Mayaskin, that's exactly what we're talking about. That kind of transaction the Beis Hamikdash is allowed to do. That the agreement was to supply the special flour for four bushels full for any amount of money. And now the price rose so that what you could have bought 4 bushels for, now you can only buy 3 bushels for. And so as a result, even though the price went up, Tanya, we have a brisa that says, if I commit to give to the Beis Hamikdash a supply of 4 bushels, va'amdu mishalosh, and now the price goes up, and it's worth an amount that's only 3, misapek ma'arba. I have to give you the 4 at the current value. Meaning at the prior value, even you, the Beis Hamikdash, I have to give the Beis Hamikdash the 4 at the original price, at the lower price. Mishalosh va'amdu me'arba. And if on the other hand, I agree to pay you 3, but now the price goes down, so now the Beis Hamikdash had said that they were going to pay an amount that would now get them 4. Misapeg ma'arba. I have to give them 4. Shiyad hektish al ha'elyona. Basically, the Beis Hamikdash always wins with respect to price changes, and it's tough luck on the other person. And we allow that despite the fact that it looks like ribis, because it's a futures transaction. And so that would be permitted. Now, again, a reminder, if on the other hand, my transaction with you is for you to buy, that I pay you $100 now, and you give me $100 worth of wheat, whatever the price of wheat is, in 6 months, that would be a valid transaction. I just can't lock in the price today if none of the exceptions apply. Okay, so Rav Papa says no, that's not the case. Or here's another case that we could be talking about with respect to interest. We're actually talking about stones that are being used in the Beis Hamikdash construction in order that have been given to the treasurer. And Rashi explains, "Ba'avnei binyan askinan shehilva hagizber mehen," that the treasurer lends out these stones lehedjo to a regular person. De'ein behen me'ila, that in that situation there would be no me'ila. Ve'ein al hagizber l'shalem ela shliach ba'almahu. And again, it's not as if the Gizber is doing it. Again, it's doing it on the behalf of the Beis Hamikdash. And here's your case, Ken, that you were suggesting, that what happens is Kiddush Shmuel, the Amar Shmuel, Bonin B'chol, that what the Beis Hamikdash would always do is they would always build with non-sacred, with regular stones. The Achar Kach Makdishin. And once the stone was in the wall, then they would be sanctified. And Rashi explains, either they would be sanctified, meaning that the Beis Hamikdash would pay for them, or if they were being donated, so then the donor would actually say at that moment that it's going to be sanctified. And why does that work? It works as follows, because when unlike the money that has been given to the Beis Hamikdash, where the Beis Hamikdash can only use it for set aside purposes, here the stone has been given to the Beis Hamikdash's property, but it is not yet holy, and therefore there's no me'ila associated with it. So even though the Beis Hamikdash has the right to take it and put it into the wall, and the reason that they did this, as Rashi explains, is the fact that we didn't want somebody to sit on the stone and thereby do me'ila. Because if the stone had been donated to the Beis Hamikdash, and now you have a random stone out there just hanging around, if somebody were to sit on it, they would end up performing me'ila potentially. And so as a result, we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that the stone is already built into the structure, and then we can make it hektish. But if while the stone is being waited to be constructed, it's lent out to somebody, I don't know exactly why somebody would want to borrow a stone, but nonetheless, they borrow the stone in order to use it as a doorstop or whatever, and then they give it back. So then that would be a situation where they could charge interest. They could say, if you want to rent out this doorstop, you have to give back the doorstop and pay back another. Or you have to, if you want to borrow this stone and use it to put in your own house, you just need to give us a stone of equal value plus an interest payment, or maybe pay us for the stone and along with an interest payment that's associated with it. So all of that would be possible according to Rav Papa, because the stone has not actually been formally made holy. So those are two different possibilities where we could have that the Beis Hamikdash is charging interest. Okay, so next, so our Mishnah mentioned So ein behen tashlumi kefel, that in addition to there not being any ona with respect to slaves and contracts and hectic, and what was the last category? The last category was slaves, land, slaves, contracts, land. That was the one I was missing. Slaves, contracts, land, and hectish. That in addition to there not being any no with respect to them, there's also no obligation to pay back double if you were to steal it. So minani mili, how do we know this? And this we actually saw this in the Gemara in Bava Kama. So the Tanur Rabbanan, I'll call Devar Pesha plow. The fact that it says, with respect to the discussion of the obligation to pay double, that it says every kind of liability. So that's a generalization. Al shur, al chamor, al seh, al salma, prat. Then it specifies an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or a garment. Al kol aveda asher yomar. And then when it says that the person is going to swear falsely about having something. So then it says about again, any lost thing. Again, that is chazer v'klal. That's another generalization. So we have klal u'prat klal. So when you have a generalization followed by a specification followed by a generalization, we say that the rule is that you follow we make a general rule based on the specifications. So maha prat meforish, I'll be done in 2 minutes. Maha prat meforish, davar hamitaltel begufo mamon. So just as the specified item is something that's movable and has value, kol davar hamitaltel begufo mamon. So too anything that's movable and has intrinsic value. Yatsu karkos she'ena metaltum, that excludes land, which is not movable. Yatsu avadim shehuksha lekarkos, and it excludes slaves because they're comparable to land. Yatsu shtaros she'af al pisha metaltal and ein gufan manman. And similarly, it excludes the contracts because they don't have intrinsic value. It's just the what's written on them is what gives them value. And hekdeshos amar kra re'ehu. And when it comes to hekdesh, the pasuk says his fellow re'ehu below hekdesh, and we say his fellow and not actual hekdesh. Below tashlim and arba hay, and we don't pay the dalit and hay. We don't pay 4 times and 5 times. My time. What's the reason? Tashlimi dal b'hay amarachmana below tashlimi shlosh of arba. Rashi explains that the understanding is that the 4 and 5 time payment includes one of those multiples is for the double. And so if you don't pay double, that would mean that you would pay 3 and 4. And 3 and 4 is not what the Torah says. So therefore, the 4 and 5 don't apply as well. Shomer chinam eno nishba, and we said that a shomer, unpaid watcher, doesn't swear. Menahani mili, how do we know, again, with respect to these items, if he's watching it, he won't have to swear? The Tana Rabbanan, ki yitin ishel re'ehu, when somebody gives his friend something, klal, that's a general rule. Kesef ochelim, whether it's money or vessels, prat, that's a specification. And then v'guna mebeis ha'ish, and then it's stolen from the person's house. Chazer v'klal, klal u'prat klal, yutadan elakena prat. So again, we have a generalization followed by specifications followed by a generalization. So it excludes. And so the point is that only things that are similar to the specification. Ma prat meforish davar hamitaltal and begufo mamon, af kol davar hamitaltal and begufo mamon. So to anything else that is actually like movable and has value. Yatsu karkos she'ena metaltalin. So again, it excludes land which is not movable. Yatsu avadim shehuksha karkos. It excludes slaves which are similar. Yatsu shtaros she'af al pisha metaltalin ein gufan metaltalin ein gufan mamon. I'm sorry, af al pisha metaltalin ein gufan mamon. That even though they are movable, they are not considered, they have no intrinsic value because again what the value is based on the money. And hekdesh, when it comes to hekdesh, amar kra re'ehu, the pasuk says your fellow. So as a result, re'ehu below shel hekdesh. So again, doesn't apply. Next, we'll add a little bit of the Gemara. No se schar eno mishalim. We said a paid watcher doesn't pay with respect to these items. Minani mili, how do we know this? That in fact, when it comes to some kind of it being lost or stolen, that he won't have to pay with respect to it. Ki yitain ish El Reyehu, klal. Again, we have this generalization of when a person gives something, chamor, oshar, oseh. Again, a ox, a donkey, or sheep. That's a specification. Prat, v'chol behema lishmor, or any kind of animal to watch. Chazer v'klal. That's a generalization. The klal, pratoklal. So again, we have a generalization, specification, generalization, and so we make a generalization based on the specification. Again, this is something that is movable and has value. So too, anything that's movable and has value. Yatsu karkos, she'ena metaltalin, yatsu avadim, shehuksha karkos. So again, that excludes karka because it's not movable. It excludes slaves because they're comparable to land. Yatsu shtara she'afal pisha metaltalin, ein gufan mamun. Again, just like it excludes contracts because even though they're movable, they don't have intrinsic value. Hekdeshos, and when it comes to hekdesh, amar kra re'ehu below hekdesh. So again, what we've done is we've shown that when it comes to the obligation for a shomer sachar to pay, or when it comes to a shomer chinam to swear, or when it comes to kefel, or when it comes to dalad v'hei, all of those will not apply to a slave, to a hektish, to karka, or to a contract. And so we'll pick up, God willing, tomorrow and talk about the requirement, the fact that you're not going to have an oath that's associated with this. And so as a result, yes, we're going to deal with the shomer. We dealt with the shomer chinam, not swearing, and now we're going to go back and talk about again the shomer chinam not swearing, and deal with the oaths that shomer chinam needs to make if something happens to the item in order for him to be not liable. And we're going to find something. There's going to be a Mishnah that we're going to see that may constitute a contradiction. But we'll explain and we'll deal with that contradiction, God willing, tomorrow.
I want to ask one question.
Please.
Okay. Around Ona. The Ona applies for a 1/6, right? That's the concept.
That's the way we paskin. So yes, Ona says that if there's a 1/6 price difference, so then you don't the transaction is valid. So again, we'll do a simple case. This Gemara is worth $6. I charge you $7 for it. It's a valid transaction. I have to pay you back $1.
So if it's more than 1/6,
if I charge you $8 for it, then you give me back the Gemara. I give you back your $8. It's a
and
void
it's invalid transaction. And
Correct.
if it's less than 1/6,
if I charge you $6.50, so then I keep everything, and we say that you waive any
right. So then so it's less than 1/6.
Exactly.
So you just waive that. It's a small amount. We waive it.
Correct. And you keep the Gemara, and the transaction is valid.
So if the transaction is 1/6, you have to pay back the difference. But if it's exactly a 1/6, if it's more than a 1/6, the transaction is invalid.
Correct.
So we said earlier regarding Beto Mechak, if it's more than 1/6, the transaction is invalid, right?
So this is where you get into a debate between when we're talking about the four products that we're talking about in our Mishnah, where we say Ein Lahem Ona. The question is does the threshold remain at 1/6? Tosfos, Rashi says the threshold remains at 1/6. So that means that when it comes to karka, shtaros, slaves, and hektish, if the price difference is exactly a 6, it's a valid transaction. If the price difference is more than a 6, it's an invalid transaction. But Tosfos says, 1 second, there's another Gemara.
Right.
You can't just paskin based on this Gemara. And so as a result, for Tosfos, when it comes to real estate, the difference is a 50%/100%. So as a result, if you'd have to charge more than double in order to have a void transaction.
So it would still be, according to Rashi, it's void if it's greater than a 6th, right?
Correct.
So, but that is Ona as well, right? Ona, if it's greater than 6, it's invalid.
Colloquially, we will often say that all of these laws are ona. But when the Gemara uses ona, it's talking about only at the threshold where you pay the difference and it's a valid transaction. Or often, when the Gemara uses the term ona, it means only when it's at that valid transaction and you pay the difference back. That's what it's talking about. And what's more than 1/6 is called bittul mekach.
Okay, so that's bittul mechak. So
Exactly.
So that is that is within the concept of ona. If it's greater than 1/6, is bittul mechak, right?
Correct.
So that would apply whether it's land, whether it's a piece of pottery, whatever, it's the same thing.
Correct. According to Rashi, yes.
So according to Rashi, how are we distinguishing between a land transaction and a piece of pottery? Because if it's greater than 1/6, it's still bittul mechak, whatever it is.
You're absolutely right. According to Rashi, the difference is very, very small. The difference is that if I charge you $7 for this $6 Gemara, so then it's a valid transaction, I pay you back $1. But if I charge you $7 million for a piece of property that's worth $6 million, it's a valid transaction and I pay you back nothing. If I charge you $7 million and one, then it's an invalid transaction and we go back and we have to undo the whole thing.
Then if it's greater than the sixth. Or maybe
Correct. If it's greater than a 6, it's bittul mekach. But if it's exactly a 6, then it's going to be a valid transaction and no payment. That's the difference between real estate hectic. So it's a very, very small difference. It's only if I charge you, $7. If again, this is not a hectic book,
right.
but
Okay,
if
I
this book were
understand.
hectic and I was the gizbar of hectic and I was selling you this book and I sold it to you for 7, and you paid 7, even though it's really worth only 6, you would have no claim against it. But if I'm a regular private person and I sell you this for 7 and it's really worth 6, I would have to pay you $1. That's the only case when there would be a difference between hektish and non-hektish.
Oh, so if it's great, if it's a sixth, if it's or if it's land, you don't
Or
have
if
to
it's
pay.
land, exactly. Obviously, I can't I can't show you land, and so that's why I'm
Yeah, I understand. But okay, so land, even if it's greater than the sixth.
If it's greater than a 6, there's no difference between land and
If
other
it's a
things.
sixth, if it's a sixth.
If it's exactly a 6, then the difference is that instead of paying you back the difference, it's just a valid transaction. So it's basically 1 penny. It's a razor edge. It's a razor edge.
And
That's the
there's no
difference according to
bittul
Rashi.
mechach. It's only bittul mechach if it's greater than a sixth.
Correct. According
According to Rashi, right. But
Yeah.
if it's a sixth, the transaction is good, but you don't have to pay me the difference.
Correct.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Now, where things get more complicated is once we add in Tosos. So
Okay.
Tosos,
Because that's a different ASIC then. That's a different ASIC then.
exactly.
Okay.
Again, the reason that the other opinions exist is not because of this Gemara, right? If you were to just have this Gemara, it would make a lot of sense what Rashi says, because it seems like the bittul mekach is 1 penny more than ona. But given the fact that there are other Gemaras that suggest that there's a broader sense of no ona, and that bittul mekach must exist at some different threshold, or maybe not at all, that's what complicates things.
Well, it may not be bittul mechach according to some.
Correct, exactly. According to some, they don't even hold of the bittul mekach that we say over here. They say that there's no bittul mekach whatsoever, because that Gemara can be understood elsewhere as saying eino nala karkos legamri, and even ein bittul mekach.
So if you overcharge by $20 million, the sale is good.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
All right. Yishikoach. Thank you for the questions, because
All right. Thank you.
they really help the audience. All right. Have a great day.
All right. Thank
See you
you.
tomorrow, God willing.